Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.TV. Mayor Bill de Blasio is nearly halfway through his term. He's wrestling with serious challenges having to do with homelessness, the public schools, and the treatment or mistreatment of prisoners in the enormous jail complex on Rikers Island. How's he doing? Meanwhile, New Yorkers were on their best behavior recently for a visit by the Pope. But who are the New Yorkers now, and how has the city changed over the past several decades? In other words, how are we doing? And then, on the national level, we've got a presidential race crowded with candidates and potential candidates who are duking it out in an almost carnival-like atmosphere that is amusing to some and disturbing to others. How are they doing? We'll discuss these matters and more with my very special guest, Ronnie Eldridge, an activist and former public official who went on to become a distinguished journalist and who is a cherished colleague of ours here at CUNY TV, where she is the host of Eldridge and Company. Ronnie, thank you for dropping by.
Distinguished.
Distinguished, exactly right. I really appreciate it. So, as I've alluded, you've had an amazing career, and among other things, you've worked for John Lindsay, Bobby Kennedy, Mario Cuomo, and of course you've also been a member of the city council. How did you become involved in politics?
My family was always interested. Mm-hmm. I was born on January 30th, which was Franklin Roosevelt's birthday. He was the president. And immediately I had this connection. And in those days, they'd have a March of Dimes big gala on my birthday. So, I mean, I wrote to the president, he wrote to me. So I was just always interested. I wore
birthday letters from FDR.
Yeah, one. I wrote. I wore a Roosevelt button, FDR button, in 1936. So you can imagine. And years later, I met Alf Landon.
Oh my God!
It was really
there really was an Alf Landon.
Yeah, there really was. And he was such a nice man. And he was against the war in Vietnam. And he was more Democrat than Republican. So anyway.
Oh my! Yeah, they had those in those days.
Yes, right.
You know?
Yeah.
So let's go back to the Lindsay years. You thought that John Lindsay was a great mayor. Now, actually, a lot of people thought John Lindsay was a great mayor, but also there were a lot of people who felt the other way. Why did he generate such strong feelings, pro or con, do you think?
It's interesting. I never I really haven't thought that through. He was very enlightened, you know. He was a Republican, another liberal
right.
Republican.
This is back in the 1960s.
Yeah, who had a very decent soul and a big belief in democracy and in elevating people, in equality and dignity of people. So he had a very smart staff and administration, and he set about to change it.
Yeah,
he followed Abe Beame, and
right.
and Bob Wagner, who I'm not saying wasn't a good mayor, but he was a typical Democratic mayor, and the machine and everything. And Lindsay was a reformer.
And he was also like a very colorful individual. Wagner was kind of colorless.
And Abe Beame was...
Yeah, and New York was called Fun City in those days. Was it really?
Well, it was. We had street closings and great, carnivals on different streets in different neighborhoods. He started little city halls instead of...
Oh, in the neighborhoods.
Which then he had task force, which really preceded community boards.
Right.
I had the village task force, which was interesting because it was all single-room occupancy and welfare hotels. But he just did that. He had changes. He paid attention. He had the school strike, and that, the decentralization of schools and trying to have community control, and that brought forth tremendous animosity.
that was a big problem on a lot of fronts.
Right.
And then also he had that ridiculous snowstorm. That was just bad luck.
He had bad luck.
So how did you come to work for him?
I had retired because I was a district leader on the West Side, a very reformed community. and active, very active. I wasn't a typical co-leader where, I'd serve the coffee.
Right.
Anyway, and then Kennedy was shot, and I think I quit in '69, and I had different other activities. And I had met Kriegel and Jack Newfield during and Barry Goddard during the school strike. They had come to talk and stuff like that. And so they asked me the day before the Republican primary. Barry called and asked if I'd come down and meet Dick Aurelio, who was the campaign manager then, because Lindsay was going to lose the primary, the Republican primary, and they wanted some help with the Democrats. So I said I would help, but I'd have a little difficulty if Badillo won the primary. We had a lot of candidates. Most of them were not very good. Norma Mailer was terrific.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, right. Anyway, so I went in the next day and I organized the Democrats for Lindsay.
A fellow named Breslin was on that ticket.
He was. He ran for president of the city council. He actually ran ahead of Mailer.
Understandable from my perspective,
Yeah,
but that's a different story.
So I was there, and then I'd never met the mayor. It wasn't until after the election. And Aurelio, who became a deputy mayor, asked if I'd like to join the administration. So I had 3 kids at home. I was a housewife.
Right.
So I went in.
So you did.
And I was the only Democrat for a while on the staff. The staff was Democratic, but they weren't identified with the party.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about was, in those days, there weren't very many women in significant positions in government and politics. And I remember I went to the Daily News in 1976. And even then, there weren't many women covering politics and government and that sort of thing. So what was it like for you in those days? And also, what was it like for women in general who wanted to have a say in how their government would work?
Well, it's interesting, because I always thought how lucky I was that these people were giving me a job or listening to me. It never occurred to me, that I was as good or strong as other members. Always had that little feeling. I don't know. I was the advocate for everybody. The women came to me. I worked with NOW. We worked on child support and abortion. That was an issue then. So I got those issues. The gay activists came to see me. I was the connection to them.
Right.
Being the only woman in City Hall, I got all these, what some people would say, ragtag groups that would come to me. So I became their advocate.
But also a genuine liberal.
Right. And so it just was natural. So we pressured for more women appointees and different things like that, and it was a constant struggle.
Bobby Kennedy, to say that you were an admirer is apparently an understatement. There are so many stories about the Kennedys embedded in myth. What was it beyond the myth that drew you to Bobby Kennedy?
I hated McCarthy and McClellan. Was that the commission? Yeah, right. That Kennedy was on the staff of. Right. And he had whatever his name is, Roy Cohn.
You mean working
this was before,
for McCarthy?
Yeah, when he was working for the Senate. But then when he was appointed by Jack Kennedy, and of course we all love Jack Kennedy, he brought a whole new thing, and that was our generation, and it was an incredibly exciting thing, and it gave you a feeling that you really could do something with the government, because that was pre-Lindsay. When Kennedy came out to announce his brother was going to be the Attorney General, I'll never forget, he came out of the house that he lived in Georgetown. He looked here, and he looked there, and he said, good, nobody's watching.
Right.
And he announced it. And then Robert Kennedy had pictures of his children that they had done hanging on his wall. It just made me immediately like him.
Wow.
I don't know. And then it's all political reform politics. The West Side was not the same as the East Side, and the East Side didn't like Kennedy at all. They were Wagner people. We were not Wagner people. It's a whole complicated thing.
Yeah, Kennedy did not just breeze into that.
No, it was a very tough
Senate
race.
seat, yeah.
And we supported him. So we were the balance then to the machine people who supported him in the campaign. Right? And we worked very hard.
Did you personally find him inspirational?
I loved him.
You did?
Yeah, from the very... It was a transition. I mean, when I first met him, he was so shy. It was like he was a frightened deer or something.
That's another thing people don't realize about, because you think of the Kennedys as such dynamic figures.
And of course, he had the labor problem and strikes, but he was very shy. And of course, he had such compassion and empathy for people. And it developed. I mean, at first it was like, I think, his brother's legacy, but afterwards it was his own belief.
What I remember especially about, I want to talk a little bit about how New York has changed. What I remember especially about New York in the 60s and 70s, is how affordable the city was in those days. I mean, folks could come in young people could come in from out of town. They could afford to get an apartment in Manhattan without, 5 or 6 roommates or anything like that.
$200 was a lot of money.
Yep, and I remember when I came in the late 70s, the subway fare was 50 cents, and it was half fare on weekends. So on weekends, you could go all over the city of New York for a quarter.
Yeah. It's incredible. I'll tell you, this is a terrible, story. At one point, a group of us from the playground decided we wanted to live in a brownstone, and we looked at had the West Side Urban Renewal Area. There were 5 of us, we bought 7 brownstones. There were 4 on the south side of 94th and 3 on the north side of 93rd, so Common Gardens. There was a school. We bought them for $210,000.
Isn't that something?
7 buildings, $30,000.
Because there was a time when people had trouble unloading these buildings, right?
We each put up $3,000. We went to contract and we bought.
So you and I both remember the Ed Koch years very well, and Koch was famous for saying, "How am I doing?" Well, now we have Bill de Blasio mayor. He is an unabashed liberal. I don't know when liberal became a dirty word, which seems kind of crazy to me. But it's always tough being mayor, and he's dealing with homelessness and fights over schools and that sort of thing. In general, how's he doing?
When I worked for Lindsay, we had a terrible homeless problem.
Right.
So we still have a terrible homeless problem. We had a terrible education problem.
We still
have it. It's just, I don't know.
Well,
race, we still had the cops and people. The Civilian Review Board was a major issue and defeat for Lindsay. So it hasn't changed. I think he takes himself too seriously.
Right. See, lighten up a little bit, maybe?
Yeah. He lectures.
Right.
And he promises too much, I think. He's a little deceptive in his promises. So I think, it's not a good spirit in the city. Right. Traffic is bad. The housing is just impossible. Everything. So it's not really his fault, I guess. But I don't.
But and I agree with you about the idea of these problems continue. So I guess it was Rudy Giuliani was getting on his case about homelessness recently. I'm thinking, ridiculous. Are you kidding me? Do you remember homelessness when you were mayor? And then there was an extraordinary increase in the numbers of homeless people under the last mayor.
Bloomberg was,
Bloomberg had a terrible problem with homelessness and was not able to crack it. So it's
there was more of an explanation during the Lindsay days because the federal funding was still coming in to a degree, but the welfare allotments to people were so skewed. So in Mississippi, you had the money that a family on welfare would get was so minuscule compared to New York that people sometimes moved here.
Right.
And we had the exodus from Puerto Rico. It was different kinds of population. This is a worse one, I think.
Was there anyone since Lindsay that you think was a really good mayor of New York?
Well, funny that some things that Bloomberg did were good, but he didn't have the compassion or the soul.
Right. And
I think that's an important ingredient. Koch.
Words fail me.
My first experience, I did the lead poisoning program for the city, and so then I was on a task force after we changed how we tested kids and everything. The first thing that happened was I was called when Koch was mayor that I was off the committee. So that was my approach.
Well, so what made you run for city council? You were, was that 1990 that you started on the city council?
Yeah.
You were elected in 89?
With a new charter.
Right.
I had worked for Cuomo, and then I had resigned, and I wasn't really doing anything. And I had married in the meantime. I ran for borough president once years before.
Yeah, I remember.
David Dinkins, and all. I think I was the best person, but I didn't. I don't know what happened. I guess with Jimmy, wasn't worried about supporting my family.
Right.
So I had the time off, so I did it.
So, and then you won.
I won.
I mean, did you anticipate winning?
I did. I knew I was going to win. Nobody else thought I was going to win.
Really?
Yeah. And they wouldn't, I mean, the city council people, somebody said, you've got to go down and speak and meet the speaker and talk to Joe Strasberg, who was the chief of staff. So I went down there, but they didn't think I was going to win. They thought Scott Stringer was going to win. They weren't interested in me. And I won I won twice as much as all of my opponents together.
Wow.
We ran a great campaign. My daughter ran the campaign.
We ran a great campaign.
Yeah, we did.
Did you enjoy being on the council?
I did. Yes, I did. It was a very exciting, because the city council is right in the middle of the people you govern.
Right.
And City Hall used to be such a beautiful little building that you could just walk up the steps and go in.
I remember that.
Remember?
Everybody used to just, breeze up and down those steps,
right.
hang out. It was lovely.
And I liked it. I found it very frustrating. There were 6 of us who would vote against things. And the minute we voted against the speaker, the leadership of the council, I'd be knocked off a committee or I'd lose my chairship.
Right.
But it was a lesson which was so interesting, and what people are so afraid of today is to stand up, is to have a spine of principle and to keep that, because people respect that. So the more the council went against me, the more popular I became in the district. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. I mean, I think that makes sense. I also think that there are an awful lot of politicians now, office holders, who are just out of touch with their own constituents.
Right.
Which, I mean, it's tough. I'm not sure what's happening to our democracy, to tell you the truth. It seems like ordinary people, and then this might lead me to talk about politics on a national level, but it seems like ordinary people don't have a real say or much of a say anymore in what the government does. They feel unable
to do it. I mean, I even look on the website now when I call somebody. It never occurs. I mean, you can't get through to anybody.
Exactly.
But it is on the national scale, and the polling, and it's always going to the middle. I mean, it brings such mediocrity to the politics.
I agree. So since we're on the national level, we've got this presidential campaign going, and we've seen a few, but this seems like a really wacky presidential campaign to me. On the Republican side, we've got these nutty debates where Donald Trump sort of is almost like the entertainer-in-chief or something like that. We can both remember the Kennedy-Nixon debate, which was taken extremely seriously in this country. And now we have what I think of as this lunacy. How did that change? I know it's been a long time, but how did we get here?
Money, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the campaigns. I mean, the money it costs to do that. I think the increased use of polling, I don't think it used to be that much.
Right.
The parties were different. Remember, the Democratic Party had a platform.
Absolutely.
That everybody stood for.
There would be these tremendous fights over the platform. And people really were passionate. They cared.
Yeah, where is the platform? And nobody,
no one
everybody's
even thinks
in
about
conflict.
a platform anymore.
So, and even actually the nominating process before was a convention system.
Right.
68. And maybe it wasn't so bad. I just don't know. In 68, we wanted to change it to make it elect delegates opposed to the Vietnam War. So there is a way to say elect delegates for specific things,
right,
instead of having this mass choice of people who have to have a lot of money to do it.
So we mentioned what the city was like back in the 60s and 70s, and of course we went through a terrible crime period, and then crime has diminished somewhat. Now we're in this post-Bloomberg era where Times Square has been more or less Disneyfied, and there are bike lanes and what have you. So the city is really a different city in a lot of ways.
Different people coming in.
The makeup, the demographics of the city are vastly different than they were. Has it been fundamentally or essentially an improvement, or do you think of it as better than the 60s and 70s, or have we gone backwards in some ways?
I think it went off on a different road. you know. I don't like the bike lanes in Manhattan, especially. I mean, I think they're fine around parks and maybe in outer boroughs.
Same
but in
here.
Manhattan, they're crazy.
They make no sense.
Right.
They're
not, dangerous.
They're dangerous, and they're not used. I don't see that many bicyclists.
I think it's a joke, all those bikes. I think they empty them out. So you've got the bike lanes, which make the traffic worse. Then you've got these parks that are in the middle where all the gas fumes come, which are totally unnecessary. And they used to complain about 42nd Street being, all burlesque or sex, and now it's all this other stuff. It's as grotesque or more so.
I agree.
So the traffic, it just isn't right. I think it's more of a city for tourists than it is for the residents. Actually, it is a city for tourists rather than for residents. Property taxes are higher. The rents are higher. We're not protecting people who live here.
It seems to me, I think it is becoming more and more a city for tourists, but it seems to me that in the old days, if that's how you want to characterize it, there was sort of like more of a personality that New Yorkers had. It was tougher. That's where that phrase came. If you could make it here, you could make it anywhere. And it doesn't seem quite like that anymore. But one of the things that really bothers me is I think that it is much tougher for young people to come in and get a foothold, just simply because it's not affordable.
They move out.
Yeah. So they move further and further out. I mean, Brooklyn is no longer affordable for a lot of people. But I think there's also a lot who just don't come in.
It's too crowded and it's too much.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I have a Manhattan perspective, so that's a little skewed. But, I mean, if we're going to talk about young people who are going to, really, what do you call them anyway? They're going to look for other places to live.
Yeah, I think they are. So you lose that youthful dynamic, the creativity, and that sort of thing.
Well, it's becoming more corporate, right?
I know.
And even in the Lindsay days, it used to be, for me at least, if you're rich, you must be smart. Yeah?
Right.
And it's now literally here. I mean, I think that's Trump. If you're rich, you must be smart.
Yeah. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but you and I have been talking a few minutes ago about these gigantic buildings that are going up in Manhattan. If you look on 57th Street, I mean, they're 90-some stories high, casting the shadow across Central Park. You mentioned a couple of other buildings. What do you think about this massive building in Manhattan?
It's the real estate people who, they're rich, so they must be smart, and they know what they're doing. And
but they're finding rich people to inhabit these buildings, I imagine.
And rich people, a lot of them who don't really live here, who pay for the
corporate
buildings,
corporate
even
apartments.
themselves pay for it in cash, and don't work here, so we don't get their income taxes, and we don't benefit at all from their thing. What is it? It must be bigger and larger, and that's the only thing I can think of why we're doing it.
If you were on the council now, what would be the issues that you would especially want to sink your teeth into?
Well, I wanted to say, when you talked about paying attention to constituents, you also have to have a larger view of the city and problems,
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's taxes and economics and stuff. And for me, it would most likely partly be criminal justice. I mean, close Rikers Island. Get rid of it.
Stories coming out of Rikers, I mean, they're like stories out of the Middle Ages. I mean, they're abusing prisoners, abusing young people.
It's grotesque. It's just grotesque. The whole criminal justice system. It really is.
Which is just one more thing for, de Blasio to have to wrestle with, but you don't have the resources.
We have so many people incarcerated. Where do they come from? But as a society, we've I don't know, I guess we haven't changed, but it's more prominent now. I mean, these executions like we're having.
I know. Well, they resumed. In Georgia, I think, just executed a woman for the first time in I don't know how many years.
She was found guilty in 1998. So she's been on death row all those years, and now they execute it. Right. So I don't know. It's just a moral thing. I guess it's, when they talk about generations and the different things, it's an evolution. And maybe they say that Generation Y is going to be different, so maybe we'll see some improvement.
So these tough issues will remain. You and I will get a chance to talk about them again.
Yeah, sadly.
Ronnie Eldridge, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a moment with a final word. Since December 14, 2012, when 26 people, including 20 small children, were murdered at an elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut, 85,000 other Americans have been killed by gunfire. 85,000 since the end of 2012. Since 1968, the year that Bobby Kennedy and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were assassinated, 1.4 million Americans have been killed by gunfire. That includes those killed by suicides and then accidents with guns. 1.4 million. That's more than all the Americans killed in all the wars in U.S. history. I don't know what it will take to wake Americans up to the fact that we have a serious problem with guns in this country and that something needs to be done about it. Right now, we're doing absolutely nothing. Zilch. Have we become so dysfunctional as a society that we can't even take care of our most urgent challenges, not even when tens of thousands of lives are at stake each year? Apparently. That's all for now. See you next time.